In the heart of Zamaru, a small Nigerian village where the rivers ran deep and secrets ran deeper, a girl named Imara lived a life that was never hers to live. She was the daughter of a once proud man, Ezeji, but now she was nothing more than a shadow in her own home. Ever since her mother's mysterious death, the walls that once held warmth had turned cold, and in their place stood a woman filled with venom, her stepmother, Nyoka. Nyoka did not just dislike Imara, she despised her. She saw her as an obstacle, a burden, a mistake that should have never been born. With a smile as sweet as honey, but a heart as bitter as poison, Nyoka whispered lies into Ezeji's ears, twisting his love for his daughter into suspicion. She carries bad luck, she would say. Ever since her mother died, misfortune follows this house. And just like that, Ezeji began to look at his own flesh and blood, with eyes full of doubt. Imara was left to rot in her own home, while Ziva, Nyoka's own daughter, was draped in the finest fabrics and bathed in scented oils. Imara scrubbed floors until her fingers bled. She carried water, cooked meals, and was fed the scraps like an unwanted stray. Her father, once her protector, had become just another face that turned away from her suffering. But Imara never cried in front of them. She swallowed the pain, hiding it behind quiet obedience, because deep inside she knew no storm lasts forever. But she had no idea that a storm far worse was coming for her. The night air was thick with the scent of burning wood and distant rain when Nyoka heard the village chief's words. He spoke of an ancient ritual, a secret known only to the elders. A pure-hearted girl sacrificed to the river spirits could bring untold fortune. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but to Nyoka it was as if the gods themselves had spoken. A slow smile crept onto her lips. A pure-hearted girl. She had one right under her roof, Imara. The thought slithered into her mind like a snake in the grass. She had always wanted to rid herself of that girl, and now the perfect opportunity had fallen into her lap. Not only would she be free of Imara forever, but she would also gain wealth and power beyond her wildest dreams. It was too perfect, too easy. The river would take the girl, and in return, the spirits would bless her. That night, as Ezeji sat by the fire, staring into the flames, Nyoka knelt beside him, her voice soft, her touch gentle. "Husband," she murmured, "our home is cursed. You have felt it, haven't you? The misfortunes, the sickness, the whispers of the villagers, all because of that girl." Ezeji's jaw tightened, his hands curling into fists. He had heard the whispers, seen the way people looked at him with pity, as if he were a man trapped in bad luck. Nyoka saw his hesitation and leaned closer. "The spirits demand balance," she whispered. "Imara must be offered to the river. Only then will the curse be lifted." Ezeji's heart twisted. He was a father. A part of him wanted to stand, to scream, to protect his daughter. But the other part, the part poisoned by Nyoka's words, felt the weight of his misfortunes crushing him. Maybe she was right. Maybe the spirits were punishing him for keeping Imara alive. His silence was all the answer Nyoka needed. She placed a hand on his shoulder, squeezing it gently, as if comforting him. But deep inside, she was victorious. The plan was set. A moonless night, a river hungry for blood, and a girl who had no idea that her own home had become her execution ground. Nyoka's lips curled into a smile as she stared at Imara from across the room. The girl sat quietly, her hands folding laundry, unaware that by this time tomorrow she would be nothing but a forgotten name, swallowed by the depths of the Omu River. The night was heavy with silence, the kind that carried secrets too dark to be spoken. A thin veil of mist curled above the Omu River, its surface as still as glass, hiding the monsters lurking beneath. The trees whispered as the wind passed through them, bearing witness to the betrayal unfolding in the shadows. Nyoka, draped in a deep red wrapper, held a torch in one hand and a wicked smile on her lips. Her fingers curled tightly around Imara's wrist, her nails digging into the young girl's skin. The flickering flames cast eerie shadows on the faces of the two men standing behind them, Nyoka's guards, their eyes empty, their hands firm. "This is a sacred night," Nyoka murmured, her voice dripping with false kindness. "The spirits have chosen you, Imara. You should be honored." Imara's heart pounded. She had spent years enduring her stepmother's cruelty. But this felt different. The way Nyoka spoke, the way her fingers tightened around her wrist. It was not a cleansing ceremony. It was something else, something far worse. She tried to step back, but the guards blocked her escape. "Where is Baba?" she asked, her voice trembling. Why isn't he here? Nyoka's smile didn't falter. Your father understands what must be done. He knows this is for the good of our family. Lees. Imara knew it in her bones. Her father hadn't sent her here. Nyoka had. The river let out a low, guttural sound, as if it too could sense the evil in the air. The moon above was full, casting a silver glow over the water, making it look deceptively peaceful. Imara's breath hitched as she saw movement beneath the surface. Shadows shifting, waiting. Her blood ran cold. No, she whispered, turning sharply, trying to flee. Before she could take another step, rough hands seized her from behind. The guards yanked her arms back, their grip like iron. She thrashed, kicking, twisting, but they were stronger. One of them pulled a thick cloth from his belt and shoved it into her mouth, muffling her screams. Another wrapped a coarse rope around her wrists, pulling them tight until the skin burned. Tears welled in her eyes as she struggled against them. This wasn't a ceremony. This was murder. Nyoka stepped closer, her smile widening. She leaned in, her breath warm against Imara's ear. The spirits will reward me, she whispered, her voice like a dagger slicing through the night. And then, she shoved her forward. The world tilted. For a single, endless second, Imara was weightless, her body suspended in the air. The moon blurred, the torches flickered, the wind screamed past her ears. And then, ice. The river swallowed her whole. The cold was unlike anything she had ever felt. It punched the air from her lungs, wrapped around her like 1,000 knives. The weight of her soaked clothes dragged her deeper, her tied hands preventing her from swimming. She kicked frantically, twisting, desperate for air. But then she saw them, the crocodiles, dark shapes, sleek and monstrous, emerging from the depths like spirits of death. Their yellow eyes gleamed, their mouths opened wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth. They had smelled her. They were coming. Panic surged through her veins. She writhed, thrashing her legs, but the rope dug deeper into her wrists, trapping her in the river's deadly embrace. Above the surface, standing on the riverbank, Nyoka watched with satisfaction. The flickering torchlight danced in her cold, calculating eyes. The girl was gone. The river had taken her. Soon the spirits would bless her with wealth beyond imagination. A slow, satisfied smirk spread across her face. Turning away, she laughed, a cruel, victorious sound that echoed through the night. She didn't bother to watch what happened next. She didn't care. Imara was dead, and now riches would come. The crocodiles lunged, their massive jaws snapping just inches away. Imara's lungs burned, her body weak, her wrists bound. Death was seconds away. But then, something happened. A powerful force, unseen yet undeniable, yanked her downward. It was not the river's current. It was something else, something ancient. Before she could make sense of it, she was being dragged through the depths, away from the monstrous creatures hunting her. Darkness swallowed her. She was pulled through a narrow tunnel, her body twisting, the water rushing like a beast determined to carry her somewhere unknown. She gasped for air, but the river offered none. Just when her vision blurred, just when she thought this was another way to die, she broke through. Imara tumbled onto cold, wet ground, coughing, heaving, sucking in air as if it were the sweetest thing in the world. The roar of water filled her ears, but something was different. She wasn't outside anymore. She was inside a cavern. A low, gravelly voice spoke. "You're lucky the river chose you." Imara's head snapped up. An old man stood before her, his frame lean but strong, his dark skin weathered by time. His eyes, sharp and wise, studied her. In one hand, he held a long fishing spear, its tip gleaming under the dim light of the cavern. Who are you?" she gasped, still struggling to breathe. He stepped closer. "Jabari, and you, girl, have just been saved by something most people don't believe in." Imara's mind raced. The river had saved her. She looked around. A vast, hidden cavern stretched before her, its walls glistening with moisture. A small waterfall trickled from an unseen opening, feeding into a pool of clear water. Jabari knelt beside her, cutting the ropes around her wrists. "The Omu River holds secrets, child. There's a hidden pathway beneath it, one that has saved lost souls before, but only those the river deems worthy." Imara's hands trembled as she rubbed her sore wrists. The river had spared her, but why? Her thoughts snapped back to the betrayal, Nyoka's voice, her cruel smile, the way she had pushed her. Imara's body tensed. She was supposed to be dead. Her stepmother thought she was dead. A new fire lit inside her. Not just survival, not just escape. Revenge. Jabari watched the change in her expression and gave a knowing nod. I've seen that look before. He stood, tossing her a small bundle of dried fish. Eat. Rest. You'll need your strength. If you want to survive here, you have much to learn. The days turned to weeks. Imara learned to fight, to hunt, to swim like the river itself. Jabari trained her with the spear, taught her how to strike without hesitation, how to move without fear. She ran through the cavern's winding tunnels, climbed the slippery rocks, and let the water become her ally instead of her enemy. Her once fragile body grew stronger, faster, deadlier. But through it all, one thing never left her mind. Nyoka thought she was dead, and soon she would regret it. Nyoka walked through Zamaru's bustling market, her hands heavy with gold bangles, her neck adorned with the finest beads. She had won. The villagers whispered in sympathy whenever they saw her, their faces full of pity. Poor Nyoka, losing her stepdaughter like that. Such a tragedy. And Nyoka, ever the actress, would sigh deeply, placing a sorrowful hand over her heart. She was like my own, she would say, forcing her eyes to glisten with false tears. But the river spirits, they chose her. Who am I to question their will? And the fools believed her. They came bearing gifts, money, cloth, livestock, offerings meant to comfort a grieving mother. Nyoka had never been wealthier. She replaced her clay hut with a grander house, hired servants to do the chores, and spent her days draped in luxury. The village chief himself praised her strength. Everything was perfect, until the deaths began. It started with a goat, healthy one day, dead the next, its body twisted unnaturally. Nyoka barely paid attention. A sick animal, she said. But then more followed. Chickens dropped lifeless in the middle of the yard. Her prized cow, her most valuable possession, was found floating in the village stream, eyes wide with terror. And then came the dreams. Nyoka began waking in the middle of the night, her skin clammy, her breath short, the same nightmare, over and over. A girl standing at the edge of the Omu River, her wet hair clinging to her face, her eyes filled with fire. I am coming. The whisper echoed through her skull long after she woke up. She tried to shake it off. Just a dream, she muttered. But deep inside, fear was growing. Then, Ezeji fell sick. At first, it was just a fever. The village healer gave him herbs, saying he would recover soon. But he didn't. His body withered, his skin paled, his once strong frame became fragile. The villagers whispered. Too many strange things were happening. The river spirits are angry, an old woman muttered. They have taken her husband as punishment, another agreed. Nyoka refused to believe it. She had won. She had rid herself of that wretched girl. The river had taken Imara. There was no way she could return, but the signs wouldn't stop. Shadows moved in the corners of her home. The air smelled of the river, damp and cold, even in the dry season. And every night, as she tossed and turned in her luxurious bed, she heard it, a faint splash, like footsteps in water. Panic clawed at her chest. She needed answers. She sought out Mamarua, the most feared seer in the land, a woman whose eyes could see beyond the veil of the living. Nyoka arrived at her hut, breathless, desperate. She threw a bag of gold onto the floor. Tell me, she demanded, what is happening? Mamarua, old and frail but with eyes as sharp as daggers, did not touch the gold. Instead, she closed her eyes, inhaling deeply. The air grew heavy, thick with something unseen. Then, she spoke. The girl you betrayed is not dead. Nyoka's blood ran cold. She walks this earth stronger than before, and she is coming for you. Nyoka staggered back, shaking her head. No, that's impossible. The river took her. Mamarua's lips curled into a knowing smile. You thought the river was your ally, but the river does not forget, and neither does she. The wind howled through the village, rattling the windows and sending branches clawing against Nyoka's walls like restless spirits. She sat by the fire, wrapped in the finest silk, her hands trembling around a wooden cup. The house was too quiet. Even the servants had left her alone, frightened by the strange occurrences of the past few weeks. The whispers, the shadows, the dreams. And then, a knock. Nyoka's breath caught in her throat. A single, deliberate knock. Slow, unforgiving. She turned toward the door, her heart pounding. No one visited her at this hour. The storm raged outside, the sky split by flashes of lightning. Who would dare come in this weather? Another knock, harder this time. Nyoka stood, the cup slipping from her fingers, shattering against the floor. Her body moved as if pulled by invisible hands, her feet dragging toward the door. Something inside her screamed not to open it, but her hands disobeyed. She unlatched the door and froze. There, standing in the storm's fury, was Imara, alive, her body no longer fragile, no longer weak. She stood tall, her posture unyielding. Her warrior's clothing clung to her drenched form, her skin glistening under the rain. But it was her eyes that sent Nyoka's soul plummeting into darkness. Eyes sharp as a blade, eyes that knew the truth, eyes that had crawled back from death itself. The scream ripped from Nyoka's throat before she even realized it. She stumbled backward, hands clutching her chest. No, no, this isn't real. You drowned. Imara took a step inside. The fire flickered, casting shadows that danced around her. The villagers, drawn by Nyoka's terrified cries, rushed toward the house. They stopped in their tracks, their faces pale with shock as they laid eyes on Imara. Gasps filled the air. She lives, someone whispered. But how? Another asked. Imara's gaze never left Nyoka's face. She took another step forward, her voice calm, but carrying the weight of the storm itself. You threw me to the crocodiles. The crowd murmured in confusion, heads turning toward Nyoka. Her perfect act, her lies. They were unraveling. Nyoka shook her head wildly. Lies! The spirits took you. I had nothing to do with... Silence. Imara's voice cut through the air like a blade. She lifted her chin, her soaked braids sticking to her skin. The river chose me. The crowd gasped again. Nyoka's knees buckled. Imara turned to the villagers, her voice steady, unwavering. She took me to the river that night, bound my hands, gagged my mouth, pushed me into the waters, thinking the crocodiles would finish what she started. All eyes turned to Nyoka, their expressions shifting from confusion to horror. Imara took another step. Nyoka stumbled back. But the river does not take the innocent, Imara said, her voice thick with power. It took me to the hidden caverns. It gave me strength. It gave me purpose. Nyoka shook violently, her mouth opening and closing, searching for a lie, an escape, but there was none. The villagers stared at her now, not with sympathy, but with suspicion. A storm had come to Zamaru that night, but the real storm stood in Nyoka's house, staring her down with the fury of the gods. The night was thick with tension, the air heavy with judgment. The villagers stood in a tight circle around Nyoka, their faces once filled with respect, now twisted with rage. The truth had been revealed. The woman they once pitied, the woman who cried fake tears for her dead stepdaughter, was nothing more than a murderer. Ezeji, frail and weak, stood at the center of it all, his legs barely holding him up. He looked at Imara, his daughter, the one he had abandoned, the one he had let suffer under Nyoka's cruelty. Imara, he whispered, his voice shaking, forgive me. But Imara's gaze was cold, unyielding. You were weak, she said, her words cutting deeper than any blade. You let this happen. You let her destroy me. Ezeji fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. The weight of his guilt crushed him, but it was too late. No words could erase the years of silence, of neglect, of cowardice. The village elders stepped forward, their faces grim. There is only one punishment for such evil, Chief Olumide declared, his voice echoing through the crowd. Nyoka will face the river, the same river she tried to sacrifice an innocent girl to. Let the spirits decide her fate. Nyoka's body went rigid. No, she gasped, her voice rising in hysteria. Please, no, it was the spirits. They demanded it. The villagers did not listen. They grabbed her, their hands unyielding as they dragged her toward the riverbank. She kicked, screamed, pleaded, but there was no mercy left in Zamaru for her. As they reached the edge of the river, the moon cast a pale glow over the water. The same river that had once swallowed Imara now waited for Nyoka. Her screams shattered the night as the villagers tied her hands, just as she had done to Imara. Please, she sobbed, tears running down her face, her body thrashing. I'll do anything. I'll leave the village. I'll give away all my wealth. Just don't. But no one listened. The villagers lifted her over the edge. Imara stepped forward, her eyes locked onto the woman who had tried to erase her from this world. Nyoka's face twisted in terror as she met Im. Nyoka's screams tore through the night, wild and desperate, but no one moved to help her. The same hands that once brought her respect now held her down, delivering her to the fate she had planned for another. "The spirits will punish you," she shrieked, struggling against the ropes. "You'll all suffer. This village will burn." But her curses held no power. The people of Zamaru had seen the truth. They had watched a young girl rise from the depths of death itself. Karma had already decided. The villagers lifted her one last time. Her eyes bulged with terror. Her feet kicked against empty air. And then they let go. Nyoka plunged into the river, her body disappearing beneath the dark surface. The water was still for only a moment. Then the river came alive. Sharp, glistening teeth cut through the surface, ripples turning into a violent thrash of waves. The crocodiles, the same ones Nyoka had fed Imara to, had returned for her. Her screams were short-lived. The water swallowed her whole, her body vanishing into the belly of the river, leaving behind nothing but silence. The villagers stood frozen, watching the water turn eerily calm once more. The river had spoken. A hushed murmur spread through the crowd. "It was karma," an elder whispered. "The spirits have avenged Imara," another muttered. For the first time in years, the air in Zamaru felt lighter, as if an ancient curse had lifted. Ezeji stood at the edge of the river, his face pale, his hands trembling. The woman he had loved, the woman he had trusted over his own daughter, was gone. But it was not sorrow that twisted his face. It was shame, deep, unbearable shame. He turned to Imara, his eyes pleading. "My daughter," he whispered. "I failed you. I let her destroy you. I let my own cowardice blind me. And now," his voice cracked, "now I have nothing left." Imara stared at him, her face unreadable. She had once longed for his love, once desperately wanted him to stand up for her. But that girl was gone. The river had taken her, reshaped her into something stronger, colder. She took a step forward, standing just inches from him. "You chose her," she said simply. "You let me suffer while you closed your eyes." Ezeji's lips trembled, but he had no defense. Imara leaned in, her voice low but sharp as a blade. "Now you will suffer alone." With those words, she turned away. Ezeji's body sagged, as if the last thread holding him together had snapped. He looked around, but no one met his eyes. The village he had once ruled over no longer welcomed him, so he did the only thing he could. He walked away. He left without a word, disappearing into the forest. Some say he went mad. Others say the spirits followed him, ensuring he never found peace. But no one ever saw him again. With Nyoka dead and Ezeji gone, only one person remained in their shadow, Ziva, the girl who had mocked Imara, who had lived in comfort while her stepsister suffered, was now motherless, fatherless, and alone. She stood frozen in the crowd, her body trembling. "What do we do with her?" someone asked. "The sins of the mother should not fall on the child," an elder said firmly. "She will not live as a queen anymore. She will learn humility. She will live like the rest of us." Ziva's eyes filled with fear, but she said nothing. She knew her days of luxury were over. Imara watched her stepsister, but she felt nothing. No hate, no satisfaction, just emptiness. As the villagers dispersed, Imara stood at the river's edge, staring at the dark waters. Once, she had been a girl thrown away like nothing. Now, she was the girl who returned. The whispers of Zamaru had changed. Once they spoke of a cursed girl, an unwanted stepdaughter, a child marked for death. Now they spoke of a survivor, a warrior, a legend. Imara walked through the village, no longer with her head bowed, no longer the girl who scrubbed floors while others dined. The people who once ignored her now lowered their heads in respect. The children ran to her, their eyes wide with awe. She was no longer invisible. She had returned stronger than anyone could have imagined. Her mother's land, the place Nyoka had stolen from her, was now hers once more. But she did not use it for wealth or power. She turned it into a sanctuary, a home for the forgotten, a safe haven for girls who had been cast aside, for boys who had lost their way, for any child who had felt the sting of cruelty. "No girl will suffer as I did," she vowed, and she kept her promise. The land flourished under her care. The hungry were fed, the weak became strong, and the broken found healing. The same village that had once turned a blind eye to her suffering now looked to her for guidance. She did not seek revenge, nor did she demand their worship. She only ensured that no one else would ever feel as powerless as she once had. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, she walked to the river's edge. The water that had once threatened to swallow her whole now looked peaceful. She stared into its dark depths, her reflection rippling across the surface. You tried to drown me, she whispered, her voice steady, strong. But I became the tide. She turned away from the river, her past finally laid to rest. And as she walked back to her people, to the life she had built, the wind carried a new whisper through the village. Not of a cursed girl, not of a victim, but of Imara, the girl who rose from the depths and became a legend. Evil may think it has won, but karma never forgets. Strength isn't just about survival, it's about rising above and becoming something greater. If this story moved you, don't just scroll away, share it. Let others hear Imara's tale, and remember, no matter how deep they try to bury you, you can rise. Subscribe for more powerful stories.